Leading up to Easter, what I hope to do for the next 4 weeks is to look and turn our attention to the sacrifice that saves sinners. See, when Jesus came into the world, determined to die on a cross in our place, what he was doing was intentionally fulfilling all of the sacrifices that God put in place back in Leviticus. And what I hope that we can understand a little bit better, because we often come to Leviticus with questions or the sacrificial system, which is unfamiliar to us. What I hope that we can see is that when we understand the original intentions behind the instructions that God gave in Leviticus, we will be able to then appreciate how Christ is an offering to God, and we will be able to enjoy more of the beautiful colors in the prism of our salvation. So even though it's unpopular, Leviticus we need to understand what it is meant to be. Sometimes we think it's just that book that you skip over or you don't understand, or it just doesn't make a lot of sense to us. But when we understand what it's meant to do or what it was given for, we can begin to see the beauty of the gospel radiating all throughout of this book. What we actually find in Leviticus, and if we begin to shift our mindset to seeing it as this is the way that sinners can come into the holy, glorious, life-giving presence of God. And when we see that that is possible, we see that that are the instructions that we're given, we begin to say, okay, I need to understand this. I want this. You go back to the very beginning when humanity rebels against their Creator's authority, rejecting his commands. What does God do? He says, I am holy, and therefore you must be cast out of my kingdom, out of Eden, and you are barred from re-entering my presence lest you die. And when we're disconnected from the source of life, the source of fulfillment and joy that we were created to be with, well, then mankind is only destined for eternal misery outside of his kingdom. But God is so gracious. God is so merciful that he lovingly desires still to bless his creation. And that included a plan to make a way for the unholy to come back into the presence of the Holy One again. He begins by graciously selecting one man and his family and powerfully rescuing that one family that has grown into a nation, and to say, I will be your God. I will allow you to come near to me. And Israel didn't deserve this. No nation deserved the grace of God. This was his way of showing how kind he is toward sinners around the world. It didn't blur any distinctions either. He was the king, and they were the people. That they would still need to submit to him and obey him and give thanks to him for his faithful protection and provision for this nation. And as long as they continued to please the Lord, he would continue to grant them the fulfillment that comes from being near or being in his holy presence. So then we come to Leviticus, and we see that it has all the legal requirements on how that we can actually honor the Lord. If we're going to be his people, we need to know exactly what he wants. And that's what Leviticus offers to us. We have stipulations for sacrifices. We have directions about our diet. We have precepts for how we are to live purely. And we have laws just for how to live our life. But remember, this is an unparalleled privilege for the people in Israel, anyone to be graciously selected and brought into the citizenship in his kingdom. It was a privilege to enjoy his presence, to be a part of his kingdom, because outside of his kingdom, outside of Eden, outside of his presence, mankind is only destined for destruction, for judgment, and death. So this is how Leviticus is received. It is to these people who have already been saved, who brought into his kingdom, that they get Leviticus. So it's not as if it's a heavy rule book from an angry divine dictator. Rather, it is to beloved children who get to know exactly how they can please their Heavenly Father and their King. It's within this context that we find the sacrifices. They're already saved. They've already received and become part of the covenant. So the sacrifices aren't meant to earn God's love. They are to respond to God's love and God's grace. There are 5 sacrifices that I want to look at leading up to Good Friday. That there is a burnt offering, there is a grain offering, there is a peace offering, a sin offering, and a guilt offering. And they all have a different meaning. They all have a different purpose. But if we can begin to see how they're different, what they were meant to do, we can actually begin to see how Christ's once-for-all sacrifice on Good Friday is the good news for all of us. The first one mentioned in Leviticus is the burnt offering. That's the one we're going to look at today. So just follow along as I read the Lord's instructions in Leviticus chapter 1. I'm going to read from verse 3 to verse 17. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall offer a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, that he may be accepted before the Lord. He shall lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him, to make atonement for him. Then he shall kill the bull before the Lord, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall bring the blood and shall throw the blood against the sides of the altar that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then he shall flay the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. And the sons of Aaron, the priest, shall put the fire on the altar and arrange the wood on the fire. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall arrange the pieces, the head and the fat on the wood that is on the fire on the altar, but its entrails and its legs he shall wash with water. And the priest shall burn all of it on the altar as a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If his gift for a burnt offering is from the flock, from the sheep or the goats, he shall bring a male without blemish. He shall kill it on the north side of the altar before the Lord. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall throw its blood against the sides of the altar. And he shall cut it into pieces, with its head and its fat, and the priest shall arrange them on the wood that is on the fire on the altar, but the entrails and the legs he shall wash with water. And the priest shall offer all of it and burn it on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If his offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or pigeons, and the priest shall bring it to the altar and wring off its head and burn it on the altar. Its blood shall be drained out on the side of the altar. He shall remove its crop with its contents and cast it beside the altar on the east side, the place for ashes. He shall tear it open by its wings, but shall not sever it completely. And the priest shall burn it on the altar, on the wood that is on the fire. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Now, you probably picked up on the repetition here, that it kind of goes through it 3 times. I see some nods. Because the burnt offering can be offered in 3 different categories of animals. See, verse 3 suggests that you would bring one from the herd. Verse 10 begins another section where you would bring one from the flock. And verse 14, some kind of bird could be brought to the Lord. I think oftentimes as modern readers, we get annoyed when we read the same thing again and again and again and think, why are they wasting these words? But if I've said it before, God does not waste words. And so we look at every single one of them here. And what we actually find, if you were one of the ancient worshipers, this is a reason, this repetition is a reason to rejoice. Because if you think about it, get into their sandals for a second and try to understand how they measured wealth in those days. If you take an animal from the herd, this would have been your largest owned animal if you had one. This would be an ox or a bull of some kind. And you would look at that and say, that is valuable. That is a source of life. It gives me food, it gives me clothing, and it gives me the possibility of having more of them. And so this was a symbol of wealth, that you would have a bull. Now, if you didn't have a bull and you had something smaller, like something from the flock, a sheep or a goat, you would say the same thing. It would offer you clothing and food. It was basically cash that was walking around. And you would say, this is good. It wasn't as valuable as a bull, but it still provided for you because it was smaller. It just wasn't as valuable. And so if you think about what you may have had as an ancient Israelite, you would realize that these are symbols of cash. They didn't go to the grocery store. They didn't go to the clothing store. This was their life, their sustenance for life. And so everyone had varying degrees of wealth. So then if you think about that, whatever situation you were in, and God says now, you must bring me a bull because I am the most valuable. Well, if you didn't have a bull, then you couldn't please the Lord. You couldn't be accepted by him because you couldn't bring the sacrifice that he requires. And so actually what you see here are the three categories of wealth that if you couldn't bring a bull, you would bring something else. If you couldn't bring that, you would bring something else. So what we find actually is the grace of God. That God says, I want you to come to me and you can bring a bull, but if you don't have one, you have a sheep or a goat, you can bring that. And even among the most poor that said, I don't have anything to give, God says, you can go out, catch a bird, and you can bring that to me. And so God is making a provision here for anyone who wants to come and draw near to God. So this is a good thing. Other gods may have said, I only want this, or I don't want that. But God is saying what we hear in Leviticus is the gospel, is good news. He says, I want you to come to me. And I will accept anyone of any status who desires to draw near to my presence. So this is good news. He wants you more than he wants the gift that you bring. But the gift that you bring does matter because he requires you to love him with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. So if you're blessed enough to have a bull, to have something that valuable in your possession, you bring a bull. You love him with everything you've got. You show him that he is more valuable than anything. If you don't have a bull, you've got a sheep or a goat, you can bring one of those. But you come with your most prized possession nonetheless. If you don't have anything to offer, if you have nothing, you can go out and you can find something. You must bring something, but you can go find something like a bird of some kind. Now the burnt offering, here's the point of it. He says, I want you to bring something of value. The burnt offering was an opportunity to show God that you loved him more than anything else. It was a demonstration of your faith that says, my God is more valuable than anything in this world. Anything that I have, God is more important. And I prove it by bringing to him my most valuable possession, surrendering it to him. That's why, unlike other offerings that we'll see, sometimes you would bring and burn a portion of it, and you would take the rest home. The burnt offering is completely donated or given and devoted to God. Giving this gift of God or to God would then require the faith that he really is your life. That he is more important than anything else because you're giving up what is most precious in your life, at least your earthly possessions. So you would bring to him saying, this is the best I have and God deserves it from me. God is more valuable. I trust in God more than I trust in this valuable thing. And so without the faith that this would require, see, in the Old Testament, there were times where people would say, I'm going to do a burnt offering, and what they would bring was their injured animals, or their impure animals, or the ones they didn't want. But God says, no, I want your best. And you can show me, you can be accepted by me if you bring me your best. Now, you wouldn't go out into your flock one day if you didn't have this kind of faith, this kind of commitment to God. You wouldn't go out and pick your best animal. In fact, verses 3 and verses 10 specify that you must bring a male without blemish. So not only do you go to your biggest animals, now you're picking your most costly, your most valuable ones. The male was prized for his power and his productivity, and the one without blemish, or the one that's not injured or didn't have any spots, it was pure. It was perfect in the eyes of God. And so that's the one you're supposed to bring. There wasn't a more expensive or more excellent animal that you could bring that would show God that he is most important to you. So this and nothing less is what God demanded from his people, and this and nothing less should be what the worshipers should desire to give him. So that's where this burnt offering comes from. But I want you to know one more thing. The burnt offering was not required. It was optional. This is an offering that would flow from your heart and say, God is so wonderful. I am totally submitted to him, and I want to show him this by giving him the most valuable thing that I have. No one was forced to bring a burnt offering. It was a cheerful thing that people would say, I want to go to him, and what you would get in return is to know in your heart, to go home that day with confidence that God accepts you, that he is pleased with you because you've followed the instructions. But at the very same time, what you realize is that if you were to carry this out, you would have to have the heart, the right heart, to be able to actually go through with it. This is what God accepts, and so he will accept you if you do it. This is what pleases God, and so he will be pleased with you if you do this. We read Genesis 22 earlier, and it was there that God, it says, tested Abraham. He tested him, and what did he ask for? A burnt offering. He says, do you love me more than anything else? And God didn't ask for a bird. He didn't ask for a sheep. He didn't ask for a bull, even though we know Abraham had thousands of them. He asked for his son, his only son, whom he loved and desired more than anything else in this world. God was testing Abraham. And what was Abraham's response? He understood what God was asking. He totally got it. And he wanted to show God, did he have that kind of faith? That God was most important? Well, we read there that he cut the wood, he saddled the donkey, he traveled to the mountain, he built an altar, he laid his son upon it, he prepared the fire, he lifted the knife, and at that moment, as he was about to do it, to show the Lord that God is more important than anything, God stopped him. And he said to him, he never intended to have Isaac killed or sacrificed. He says this, now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. That is what the burnt offering was meant to do. To show God visibly what he already knows in your heart, but to demonstrate it, to say, look, I love you more than anything, and I want to demonstrate it. I want to show it. And by faith, you would come and you would obey the commands in Leviticus 1 and say, I love you. You are more important than anything else. And when you do that, God accepts you. God allows you to draw near. God is pleased with you. And you would know it. And so the burnt offering was a way to express this. And anyone who wanted the assurance that they were accepted by God, that they had the kind of faith that God was looking for, could carry out these instructions in Leviticus 1. So let's say you wanted to do this. You wanted assurance. Does God accept me? Am I pleasing to him? And in ancient Israel, this is what you would do. You would go and you would precisely know how to carry out this offering. And at the end of the day, you could go home knowing that God loves you. God is pleased with you. Although Leviticus 1, what we read is actually just the ordered instructions, this checklist of how to go about doing it. What you're doing in this moment, how you're carrying it out, was packed with meaning. And it would probably, as you go through this, it would produce in you more of the heart to express your love and joy in God himself. So let's see how this would work. The first thing is that you would go out to your field, you would willingly select your MVP, your most valuable possession, and you would bring that to God. So once you've done that, verse 3 tells us that you come right in front of God's holy presence, right at the entrance of the tent of meeting. But as you step into this sacred space, verse 11 reminds us that this is not a wide open door for anyone just to walk through. What separates you from the entrance is an altar. There must be an altar before you get into his presence. To draw near to God, there is an altar, and that matters to us. The altar is placed right in front of the entrance because anyone who goes near God's holiness, when they are unholy themselves, cannot do so without fear of death. See, when we come to God, even as believers today, sometimes we blur the lines, the distinctions between who is God and who is a servant of God. We're not on the same level as our holy creator and king of the earth, the heavens and the earth. We are far lower. We are far lesser. And so we can't just think that we can walk right into his presence unharmed. We can't look God in the eye to say, yeah, we're on the same page. We're equals. We are never equals with God. Perhaps the best way to understand this would be that you think of the sun. It's 15 million degrees Celsius. And you don't approach the sun without properly covering yourself with something. Because even at this distance that we're at, 15 million or 150 million kilometers away, it can burn us. So if we want to approach the sun, we have to properly cover ourselves to get closer to it, or it will kill us. We're not designed to withstand that kind of heat. I want you to think about God's holiness in the same way. That if you want to draw near, you can, but you need the proper covering. See, God said to Moses said, let me see your glory. And God said in Exodus 33, humans shall not see me and live. Do we get how holy God really is? He is too holy and too glorious for us to behold. And not just because we're sinful. Even these sinless creatures called the seraphim, who are existing closest to God's heavenly throne, are described in Isaiah chapter 6 like this, as having 6 wings, but only 2 are for flying. There are 2 other ones that are for covering their faces, and 2 other ones for covering their feet. There is nothing that God has created that is equal with him, that is allowed to look him in the eyes. And so they're constantly covering themselves. This covering that we need to draw near to God, that's what atonement means. It does mean forgiveness, but it's broader than that. It is a covering because we need forgiveness to come near to God, but we need to be covered in order to approach him because he is so holy. And so that's what we see in verse 4. That word is brought up, and many of the sacrifices make atonement. Because then you are covered by the animal and its death in your place so that you can now approach God. That is our covering. So when you think of the most holy place in the temple, it says that they would burn lots of incense. That made a lot of smoke. It wasn't just for the smell, but it made a lot of smoke. And when they went once a year, into the most holy place, it was dark and it was smoky, so they didn't accidentally, disrespectfully look at God. They were covered. They dare not look at him, at his face, because they were fearful of dying. That's how holy God is. So atonement is required, and that's where the altar comes in. The altar, what happens there, allows you to approach God's presence, and it makes atonement or a covering for you. At the altar, then, by the entrance, the process begins when you carry out verse 4. You shall lay your hand on the head of the burnt offering. This was not a cute little goodbye thing beforehand as you pet them on the head. The word actually means to press firmly. You lay your hand on the animal as if to somehow intimately connect yourself with it. That in verse 4, it interprets this action as identifying with the animal. That you're saying that this animal and me have a connection here so that it will be accepted for you to make atonement for you. So moments before its slaughter, this animal, you consciously place your hand on it, and you think to yourself, this is me. This animal represents me. And it will be accepted in my place as I give its life, as I give its body over totally to the Lord. This is actually what I am doing for the Lord. I want to give myself, and this animal is going to do it for me. Then verse 5 says, you, not the priest, you shall kill the bull before the Lord. Sometimes we think that we hand it over to the priest and they take care of it from there. No, the worshiper would then kill the bull in front of the altar, or actually to the north side of the altar, with their own hands. So now we're getting a little graphic. Only the birds in verse 15 are given over to the priests. It says that you give it to the priest, maybe because they're trickier to kill, I don't know. And the priest would then wring off its neck. And that's how it would be done. But these larger animals, when you bring one from your herd or from your flock, they were probably to slit their throat so they could drain out all the blood. And that was mandatory. And probably it would allow for it easier to collect in a bowl of some kind because of what comes next. Once the animal is dead, you've got all the animal's blood. Verse 5 requires then the priests to bring it over to the altar and throw it against the sides of the altar. This is not a sanitary thing. This was messy. They didn't sprinkle some drops of blood. They had collected as much blood as they could from this animal, and then they are told to throw it, to splash it, splatter the blood all on every four sides of the holy altar. And why would they do this? What was the point? Well, it's because immediately, in an instant, there was this violent, sudden appearance of bright red blood, which represented the life of the animal. It appeared. And you knew that the victim had laid down its life. When it comes to the liters of blood from bulls and goats, it was thrown on the altar. It was splashed. For the birds, verse 15 allows for its blood, because they had less blood, to drip down the sides, but the blood was still required. The life was on the altar. This striking image of all that liquid life showed the great cost of coming before the Lord, to draw near His holy presence, and that it had been paid now by the animal in your place. After the blood has been spilled, then the body is broken. Verse 6 finds the worshiper back at work. This is you again. You have to flay the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. Verse 12 shows the organization, that you would have the head and the fat. It's not mentioned here, but the skins were always given to the Levites, to the priests, for their use. And certain parts, it mentions the entrails and the legs, they needed to be washed with water. Because God demanded a pure and spotless sacrifice. Not just on the outside, but on the inside as well. Again, birds were a little bit different. It describes the process that we're told you had to remove the crop, which is that throat, or that part of the throat that bulges to hold food before it gets to the stomach. It says to remove that and to throw it in the ash pile, probably because you couldn't get it clean enough for the Lord. You cast it aside. And then verse 17 instructs you to tear the bird open by its wings, but not completely. And then, as you're busy preparing all of the pieces of your animal, the priests are also preparing for the sacrifice. It says in verse 7, the priests were at work arranging the wood on the altar, and they were starting the fire. So they had their job, you had your job, and this was all taking place in front of the Lord. The priests would then take the animal portions, put them on the altar, and burn all of it on the altar. And God had appeared before this to Abraham in fire. He appeared to Moses in fire. He appeared to Israel as fire. So there was a common metaphor that would say that God is like a consuming fire. And with fire on the altar, burning this sacrifice, it was as if God was there and he was receiving it, or he was accepting it right there. And in full view, the Lord was now receiving your gift. And then the visual of this, just to see it, and then the smoke that was now ascending up into the heavens, it was as if the body of this animal that you offered was now ascending up to God. And then you would wait to hear something. The priest that was with you this entire time, that was supervising and participating and helping you prepare and make this sacrifice in the proper way, if they deemed you worthy, that is, you have done everything according to God's divine instructions in Leviticus, then he would announce it loudly so that anyone nearby could hear, but especially you. He would say, "This is a burnt offering, a pleasing aroma to the Lord." It was confirmation. See, after all that you had done, you had come, you had carried out everything, only when the priest, God's human mediator, declared that it was acceptable to God, was it. And what he would say is that it was a pleasing aroma to God. And just to imagine that the smoke that was going up from your gift was being received as a satisfying and delightful smell, as if God had a nose, and that it was pleasing to him. And that, how he feels about that smell, that he's pleased with it, is meant to communicate how he feels about you from that animal in your place, that he is pleased with you. And this is the same of what he said to Abraham. He says, "Now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your most precious possession from me. This is what pleases God, and with you I am well pleased." So that's the assurance then that you could take home with you. Indeed, you probably had the aroma of acceptance on your clothing as well. So the burnt offering was an opportunity. It was an opportunity for those who had been saved by God, had received his grace, were part of his covenant people, and they could now say, "I love the Lord more than anything else. This is my opportunity, the way that God will affirm for me that I am accepted by him, that I am pleasing to him." The animal represented you. And it goes in your place that you desire to give your whole life to him, that you desire to live a pure and pleasing life before him, and that in his sight you are accepted. And you give your life for him. This sacrifice was a personal demonstration of complete surrender to God, and it came with the promise of complete acceptance by God. And the assurance was made available to anyone. Anyone could come and say, "I want to know if I'm accepted by God." He says, "Here's how you do it. You carry out this sacrifice. You show me that I am the most important thing, that you have faith, total surrender to me. That is what pleases me. That's what I'm looking for. And here's the way that you can do this." So there is good news. But beyond this being your own decision, this is a sacrifice that the priests were commanded to make most frequently, because this is what God wanted most. They made it every morning. They made it every evening. They made it every new month, every new moon, and every festival, sometimes many of them. Because this is what represented the people of God, people totally surrendered to him. You probably have seen that this sacrifice clearly anticipates the cross of Christ, right? He is the precious male, the costly male without blemish or any impurities, who was completely submitted and entrusted himself to God in his entire life. Every ounce of his blood was poured out for you. Every part of his body was broken for you. the only sinless person that this world has ever known, and completely surrendered to God to do His will, to do His work, was God's own Son, with whom He was well pleased. And He went on the altar for us, so that we could be accepted by God. He is the covering that we need in order to approach the Lord in His holiness. It is the only way that sinners can come back into the holy presence of God and receive all the fulfillment and all the joy and all the pleasure that we were designed to be satisfied with. With this burnt offering in mind, you'll notice that sometimes when they speak about Christ in the New Testament, they're specifically referring to this burnt offering. Like Ephesians 5, verse 2. Which states that Christ loved us. He gave Himself up for us, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice to God. See, the bad news is that God rightly rejects everyone on the basis of their own unholiness, their own impurities. But the good news is that God graciously accepts anyone who approaches Him on the basis of Christ's perfection and Christ's pure sacrifice, His holy sacrifice that covers us. That if you by faith would lay your hand on Christ, and His death will represent you before the Lord, you will have the covering that allows you to approach the Holy One. Colossians 1 says that Christ has reconciled us in His body of flesh by His death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before God. That's what Christ has done for us. That's what Christ is for us. And that's true, and Colossians adds then, that is true if you continue in the faith. That if you have faith and continue to have faith in that one sacrifice in your place, that it works. It wasn't many sacrifices. He is enough. He has covered you, accomplished this for you. How do we know then that we're continuing in the faith? How do we know this today? Well, it's not by sacrifices. We don't do those. But it is by sacrifices because we treasure Christ above all. That we will make sacrifices in our own lives. It just doesn't look like they used to. It makes me think of the poor widow who gave everything she had, which was only 2 coins, into the offering at the temple. And Jesus, in Mark chapter 12, responds to that, even though it was worth only 1 penny. He says, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing." That she gave out of her poverty. She gave everything she had. While the disciples are looking at the big buildings, the fancy gold, and all the people putting in large sums, Jesus sees her. And He says, "That is pleasing to me." Or the woman who approaches Jesus, she breaks the flask of pure ointment. And it was expensive, a year's wages. And she pours it over Jesus' head. And the people there were angry. They said it was a waste. And Jesus says in Mark 14, "She has done a beautiful thing." And He ensures that this will never be forgotten. This is what God is looking for. This is what pleases Him. This is the kind of faith that we are to have. So those who are fully accepted by Christ, by grace, not because of your sacrifice, but you can respond to His salvation with joy and cheerful giving everything, the most valuable things that you have, to show that He is more important than anything. He is your life. You will live in a way that honors Him like this. You'll wake up in the morning and you will pray, "God, my life is yours." And you will look for ways to demonstrate it the rest of the day. In Romans chapter 12, it says this. It's an appeal to us as believers, that from all the mercy that we have received from God in Jesus Christ, we ought to present our bodies as a living, burnt offering, holy and acceptable to God. So we have an opportunity here. We have such a great God, gracious God. And if you and I will live our lives like this, if you and I will offer this sacrifice to the Lord, then we can know today and every day, have the reassurance that God accepts you. God is pleased with you.